Welcome to Boris FX Live. Sponsored by Dell, NVIDIA, and Intel.
Hello everyone and welcome to Boris FX Live. I'm Ben Brownlee and you're joining us for another huge show today. Today I'm going to be joined by Steve Hullfish from Art the Cut, and we're going to have an exclusive chat with the editing team from the groundbreaking film Avatar: The Way of Water. We have first assistant editor Justin Yates, assistant editor Ben Murphy, and lead VFX editor Justin Shaw to talk with us about how they helped to craft one of the highest grossing films ever made, and how they coped with the unique challenges thrown up by navigating one of the most complex VFX pipelines in cinematic history. Now, this is Boris FX Live, and I'd like to think that we have one of the most complex pipelines in live stream history. So we are we're working through another lovely little system today. So there might be a couple of hiccups, but we're going to get through this. Basically, I'm actually really excited to be part of this one, and because we are Boris FX Live, you have a chance to be an active part of it too. And here's how. Now, if you're watching on YouTube or Boris FX Live, then you'll have a lovely little chat box just to the right-hand side of your viewer, so you can go tippity-tap and type in all of your questions there. There's another reason to be watching on borisfxlive.com as well, and that's because we are giving away some lovely prizes. And if you go to Boris FX Live, scroll down to the bottom of the page there, you can enter your email for a chance to win. And today we are going to be giving away a load of stuff. So not only do we have this thing that's coming up now. Oh, this is good. All right. Oh, where are we going to go to? Let's give away. Can we go to the Wacom Intuos Pro? Because we're giving away a tablet today. Oh yes. We've got a Wacom Intuos Pro medium tablet that is a $379.95 value, and that's going away to one lucky winner. We're going to spool back. All right, before we do the prizes, then let's thank our sponsors. I want to say thank you very much to NVIDIA, Dell, and Intel, of course, for helping us to make the show as professional as it is today. And a big shout out to the Dell Precision 3660 tower. Some call it cost effective. I call it scalable performance in a mini tower design. That's the Dell optimizer for precision as well. All right, so let's see what else are we giving away. Maybe we can move on to the next clip. There we go. Not only are Wacom giving away an Intuos Pro Medium to one lucky winner of our competition, if you're in the US, you have a chance to save $80 on a Wacom Intuos Pro right now. All you have to do is head on over to the website, to the Wacom website, or scan that beautiful little QR code, and you will save $80 on the regular price. That is on sale for $29.95, $80 off, no coupon needed, limited time only. Some people say you should act now. I do as well. All right. Okay, what else are we giving away? Maybe we can come back to the prize in a second. All right, so let's move on now and come back to me, because it is in fact my great pleasure to introduce my next guest and co-host of today's stream, Steve Hullfish. Steve is the voice and brains behind the Art of the Cut, the weekly interview series and podcast that takes you deep into conversations with some of the best editors in film, TV, and documentary. Steve, welcome for the first time to Boris FX Live. Welcome. This is
Ben. Thanks
speechless.
for letting me co-host with you.
No, thank you for being here.
There we go. You're welcome. So thanks for having me, and I'm glad I'm not frozen anymore, and great to be here.
Yeah, not frozen. We're just going to call you a little bit chilly at the moment. Yeah, we are running a new system, We swapped out our 1980s satellite feed for a 2003 internet feed. So everyone's Real Player today. So we're kicking back with Real Player. So thank you very much for sponsoring our stream, Real Player. Is Real Player still a thing? All right, maybe. Steve, can you before we get into it, maybe you can tell people just a little bit about Art of the Cut and you know where it started and what it is.
As long as I'm not frozen, right? It looks like I might be frozen. I can't quite tell. But can you hear me?
We can hear
Ben?
you. You're sounding great.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, great. So Art of the Cut is something I started 9 years ago, basically because I am an editor, and I didn't come up the way that Justin and Ben and our two Justins and Ben came up, which is through assistant editing. I went straight into the editor's chair, and so I really didn't have that great opportunity to learn from some of these great editors. So I really wanted a way to learn, and I figured, hey, what if I started a podcast and I got to talk to some of the best editors in the world, and that's what I've had a chance to do for the last 9 years and 380 plus episodes, is talk to great people like from Avatar, The Way of Water, Steve Rifkin and John Rafua, and many other editors as well. And I ask the questions that I want to know as an editor. I'm like, what do I want to know? What is my curiosity telling me that I would love to know? I'm not asking, oh, did you meet Haley Berry or whatever? You know, I'm like saying, I'm asking the questions hopefully editors want to know.
That's it, and that's why I look forward to it every week, and you can find it at the moment on the Boris FX blog. We do a lovely little highlight reel with links to the full interview we're at Art of the Cut on the Boris FX site, and the full audio of your podcast as well. But let's turn now to our other guests, shall we? Let's bring everyone else into the mix. Steve, do you want to introduce people, or should I try to do that depending on where you are? I'll introduce things actually. There we go. Let's do that. I think Steve might have dropped off for a second. He will be back. He will be back. I want to start off then with Justin Yates then. Justin, hello. Welcome to Boris FX Live. Boris FX Very Live.
Very live, and all the fun things that come along with a live stream.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, your other work includes things like Alita Battle Angel, Battleship, The Nice Guys, San Andreas, as well as VFX work on Detroit. Lead, yeah.
I've bounced around between visual effects editing and picture assistant editing throughout my career, and my first few gigs as an assistant editor were actually using Mocha and some Boris plugins to help in the cutting process with temp visual effects and things like that. I sort of cut my teeth with being a comper that could be on the cutting room team and help the editors and the director understand how their footage would work when it made it. And one of my proudest accomplishments on any film is when we're getting ready to preview and my temps stay in, even though we may have gotten submissions from a vendor. If I do that, then I feel pretty pleased with myself. So yeah, very happy to be here.
Oh, that's excellent. That's excellent. Well, let's move over to Justin Shaw. Justin, you were lead VFX editor for Avatar: Way of Water, The Way of Water. I'm probably going to say the name of the film wrong about 5 different ways, I'm afraid, throughout this stream. So please forgive me on that. But you worked on the previous Avatar movie as an assistant editor. You've also worked on Ghost in the Shell, Transformers: Dark of the Moon. Is that and a sort of among your highlights, I would suppose?
Yeah, Warcraft was another one, and I kind of cut my teeth as far as visual effects were concerned. Was a little bit on Avatar, but I jumped onto a movie called Real Steel with Hugh Jackman that was in 2010, 2011. That really sort of reinvigorated my love for visual effects and that process. And they actually were up for an Oscar, which was a lot of fun, and it was just a really fun project to work on. And then from there, I sort of just started aiming towards visual effects heavy films and also getting pulled onto motion capture films as well. Warcraft was a very mocap heavy film. Um, but yeah, now we're here on Avatar. I worked for James Cameron from 2001 to about 2010. So when the opportunity got to jump onto Way of the Water, I took the baton and ran. So I'm just happy to be considered on this film. For my position, everything's been great, and everybody we work with has been amazing. So
Excellent. And we'll obviously we'll come back to that process and how long that process took as well a little bit later. I just want to bring in the final member of the team who we're going to be talking to today, Ben Murphy. So we got two Justins and two Bens on the stream, so this is definitely not going to be confusing at all. So Ben Murphy, well, you're an assistant editor on Avatar: The Way of Water. You also were on Lego Batman movie, Smallfoot, which was an animated movie, and Ain't It Nowhere. I mean, what does that trajectory look like for you?
Yeah. So I come from Tennessee, and I actually was, after a little bit of time, became one of the America Cinema Editors interns, and that really trajected me into the world of post. And then eventually I got to work over at Warner Animation Group with John Vinson and a couple of the other editors over there for about a year at Warner Animation before I made the leap over here to the Avatar films.
Cool. So we've got the three of you, and Steve, who I wish would come back here. I think he's going to be rejoining in a second. But as Steve said, I mean, he's already done an interview for Art of the Cut with two of the four editors of the film. And I think I see Steve in the corner of my eye. Steve, are you back with us? Possibly.
I hope I'm
Steve,
here.
I hope you're here as well. It sounds like you're here.
All right. Sorry, guys.
Well, we've just gone through the introductions now, and I was talking a little bit about the interview that you'd already done with Steve Rifkin and John. Oh God, I'm gonna say his name wrong. Thank you.
Rafua.
Thank you very, very much. But I think I'm gonna hand it over to you now because you're looking great again. To maybe sort of talk a little bit about the making of the film and the making of Avatar and the team behind it. So Steve, take it away.
Well, if you've done the introduction already, one of the
here we go.
things that I'd like.
Steve, you are you're breaking up just a tiny wee bit again. This is disappointing. So I think what we'll do is I'll take over the reins just for a little bit until we send over a little bit more internet to Steve, which we will do very, very shortly. So coming back to the team here that we have here, like, can you talk to me a little bit about the rest of the team that it took, in post to put this together? Maybe some overall big numbers and then specifics of people on the team.
Sure.
So Justin Yates, can we start with you?
Yeah. So we were a big we're a big team, we're a big family, and we're all really honored that we get the opportunity to represent that large group here. And we definitely want to take a bit to go through all the names and all the people that we really could not have done this without every single one of our fellow assistants and visual effects editors, and all the artists in the lab, and all the coordinators in the building, and all the supervisors, and everybody. We were really sort of more of a mini facility than a cutting room, so it was an interesting uh, experience. Not so many, but for our purposes, we're going to focus on our amazing editorial crew that I was lucky and honored to help put together. And we'll start with, obviously myself as the first. When I was brought on by Jason Gaudio, who was one of our additional editors on A2, and he was the first assistant on the first Avatar movie. Incredible amount of responsibility that she took on and helped with throughout the course of this production. And I certainly couldn't have been able to do my job as the first without her on the crew. And so I want to thank her. And then, we brought on, as the team expanded, we brought on a couple people. We had an assistant named Greg London who was on, and when David Brenner came on, he brought on a guy named Warren Paff, and they're both great people, and they were there for a bit. And then I brought on, as we started, principal photography, and we had more and more stuff going on. We had to expand our numbers. So I was lucky enough to be able to bring on my friend and somebody I had worked with a few times before, Shant Abrahamian. And we were lucky enough to get the crew built up and growing. And we added people like Ben Murphy, who you see there, Jamal McLemore, who was amazing. We had expanded, and then Justin, if you want to take over for a bit to talk about, during that time you were able to bring on some more visual effects people. If you want to take over, and then we'll get back to it.
Yeah. Laura Ramirez. We had the two Lauras, we used to call them. It was Laura Ramirez and Laura Mazawi. And then my good friend, and then also I've worked with on a few shows, Chris Marino. He's also an awesome VFX editor. And then Bronwyn Shields. She came on a little later in the production and has been nothing but an asset to the show. So yeah.
And yeah, Chris and Bronwyn were the visual effects team on Alita, right? And then when that wrapped up, they came over officially to help full time.
Yep.
Yeah. And then, we had a really interesting setup here where we had to have people out on all the motion capture stages with Jim, or our second unit directors, or our virtual second unit director / visual effects supervisor / executive producer extraordinaire, man of many talents, Richard Bainham. And so what we had to do was have editorial presence on every single one of the stages to bring in footage as it was being shot, basically, so that at any given time we were almost up to current. And we'll get into that, the technical process of that later, but people I had to bring on would usually start there at the bottom of the process, like learning everything from the ground up. And we were able to get some great people in. Ben Stringfellow came on in that phase. Layla Wolf came on in that phase. And we had an editor come over as well from Alita when that wrapped, named Nyan Silverstein, who was one of our additional editors. And he was fantastic. And then we brought on Chinya Emma Lee, who was one of the greatest people to have on your crew. She is just a ray of sunshine and makes everybody laugh. And she'd be embarrassed by me saying that about her, but we really couldn't have done that, without any of these people. And then later on down the line, we brought on Kareem Henoui, who was another friend of mine that I was lucky enough to have worked with in the past. We brought on, and then we spun up a New Zealand cutting room because why not? And when we were going over to start live action, we were able to hire a few of the coolest and most amazing smart people over there. We had Liz Dennekamp, we had Molly McKinnon, we had Morgan Williams and Jess O'Donoghue, who had done things over in London like the Eternals and things like that previously. And they came into a pipeline that had already been largely established for a number of years, and there were like years and years of edits that we were all familiar with that they had never seen before in this weird system, and they came in and just picked it up so quickly and did such an amazing job covering the team down there, especially during lockdown when everything pretty much moved to New Zealand, where Jim was. Just some of the greatest people that I've ever worked with, really. And
But I mean that sorry, that
sorry,
just brings me
amazingly,
to a quick point.
yeah.
Though it sounds like this took a little bit of time. Like how long a span of time did it take for all of this whole process to come up to the
Shaw,
sort of maximum?
Shaw was hired shortly after Sailor was born, right? You want to talk about how long ago that was?
Yeah, my daughter turned 6 this month, so
right.
I was hired in May 1st of 2017. So that was
hired a month later in June, and so and I finished up on the film at the end of 2022, and Justin's and Ben are still rolling on and working on the third movie. So we're talking about 5.5 years of time to cover.
I mean that's can you sort of give me a bit of a kind of high level explanation of the overall workflow then of how this movie came to be? Because
but before we move on, there's a few people I still have not mentioned.
Sorry, my apologies.
I want to make sure to go back and give shouts to some people who came in during lockdown. We had and before I do that, we also had a fantastic post team. Wendy Lowe, Kristen Burby, and Zach Werb were supervising coordinators and lifelines really throughout the production, helping us with all of the various machinations that you have to go through to have things in multiple locations and schedule this and manage. I mean, there's really a lot to track and do. And then also we were lucky enough to be able to bring up Amalia Stark and Andy Palmer, who had occupied different roles on the production for a number of years, and we were able to get them in as apprentice editors, which was fantastic, and they did just amazing work for us to get through Avatar: Way of Water. And then we hired a bit further into the process, we hired Sam Utley and Christy Yang, and I think that might be the end of the list, but just to understand that the size of the crew that we had to have on at this time was proportionate to the size of the workflow to pull this thing off. So it's not and we're just one department. So yeah.
Even grander. But so I mean, maybe we can go back into that workflow just a little bit more then, and just talk about the overall workflow of how this actually worked.
Yeah, so and I want to make sure we go back and talk about because Shaw did the really, I mean, different but very hard version of this process back on the first Avatar, where a lot of things were done manually and had to be built meticulously by hand because some of these automation things that we'll talk about later had not been thought of even. And when you're working on a project like this, where you're working for a visionary sort of innovator who constantly is saying, well, I don't care that this process doesn't do what I want it to do. I want it to do what I want it to do. So you go figure it out. You're constantly challenged to create new strategies and new technologies to help make everything run more efficiently. So at the end of that process, Jason Gaudio, the first Avatar and one of our additional editors on Avatar 2, had come up with, along with the editors Steve and John and some other folks there, like a wish list of what could be better, what could be done better on the next film. And when I came in and when Shaw and I were working together, a lot of what we were doing at the beginning was going through that list and helping to manifest some of those ideas with to make sure that certain things could happen in the workflow that would make them move quicker. Because we, the first movie had a couple virtual characters in most of the scenes, and we knew going into this that a lot of the scenes in this movie were going to have 3 to 4 times that many at minimum very regularly. So there would be a lot of motion capture to keep in sync, because that was something we had to contend with constantly, was keeping reference cameras perfectly in sync in the timeline with the renders that they correspond to. And so Justin, when you and I started, I remember you showing me, here's how you bring the cameras in and you put picture-in-picture effects on them and build a stack in the timeline, and that way you can see all the reference camera angles in a 4-way split, or sort of like what we're looking at now. And then from there we started going through and making it so, once I understood some of the challenges and was able to walk around and talk to our in-house development people about using things like AAFs that we could get delivered to us to have things like a stack pre-aligned and pre-stacked for us in an Avid timeline. The challenge became, how do you have a program that's not Avid Media Composer write an AAF that Avid Media Composer will read perfectly and will represent accurately? And so a lot of the initial phases of that were really building those tools, building our incredibly complex FileMaker database that Justin spent a lot of his time wrestling with to satisfy the count sheet requests from Weta. And Justin, anything about that period of time that you want to go into?
I mean, I think you're doing an eloquent job explaining it. I know it's tough to kind of wrap your head around it. It's not visually right in front of you, but yeah, it's a tough process because everything is malleable, right? So, you could have the body performance of somebody here and the facial performance of somebody on top of that body performance. And, when you start getting those stacks, those reference stacks to emulate what's actually happening in the low res, we called it like the low res 90 video game, template. A lot of that stuff in an Avatar 1 was all manual. We got a 3DL, which was essentially just a white paper with time code. And we had to go find the reference for that and manually build out those timelines. So once Avatar 2 started, it was really, I don't know, when that started coming in proper, I knew, I got happy for the first time, I think. I was like, this isn't going to be as much as a manual process as it was on Avatar 1. But also what it did make everything malleable, whereas on the first one, really only stunt performances and maybe like set extensions where Jim wanted maybe a character to, go across in a farther time cut, I guess you could call it, or somebody that because basically the stage that we had on Avatar 1 was not as big as it was on Avatar 2. So we were doing stitches of performances in order to get that run. So, but on Avatar 2, we had larger stages. We had obviously a more robust process, and it just became, everything became, sort of a target so that they could do whatever he wanted. He could do anything he desired, it could be done. So
Yeah.
go ahead.
It's funny. It's like you the way the process sort of evolved is you end up making something on the first movie that took so much of the manpower, person hour power. You make that go away, and that just facilitates another complication to make that will take up a lot of time to make some incredibly impressive thing possible that wasn't necessarily possible on the first movie because of some limitations. So it was challenging, but it was also really satisfying to figure those things out to enable some of the stuff to come together. Like like Justin's talking about, if you have somebody running and your motion capture stage is only so big, you can only have them take 3 steps before they run outside of the range of the volume, or 5 steps. But in the movie, they may have to run 200 feet. So you have to take multiple performances and stitch them together to cover that whole distance. And in this case, we had similar things like that under the water, where the tank itself, the underwater motion capture, was only so big, but you could do these things in swim cycles to make it so that the characters were swimming farther distances than they were actually covering in physical space. So it was cool. I mean, it's very cool to be in a situation where they say, we want to do something impossible, and but you have to make it possible, and then there's the resources and the minds around you to have those things come together. It's pretty amazing.
Well, what would an edited scene look like in the timeline then? When you're bringing all these different elements together.
Yeah.
I think that's a larger question for sure.
Yeah. So we'll start with, we talked about maybe doing like a life cycle of a scene as an example, and
that sounds like a good idea.
When Ben started, and Ben, you can speak more to this, he started out on the motion capture stage, bringing in takes as they were being shot, and you can once you're out there, you can really see the process happening in full form. So the first stage, obviously, of anything is Jim and all the actors are out on the volume doing the performance capture, which you can see in some of these promotional clips that are running from time to time, where you're shooting performance. And it's tough to think about it, but I think Steve and John did a really good job covering that already on the Art of the Cut podcast. And where we take over is understanding that for every camera, every performance, there's a reference camera on a person, and those reference cameras are our 2D window into 3-dimensional data that we have to then take and translate the selects and the vision of Jim over to our in-house lab to give them instructions on how to build these scene files that go back out onto the volume at a later time. So what a cut scene ends up looking like is a couple different things. One was something called a performance edit, which the editors would put together using reference cameras, a scene that would play. If you played it, it would be sort of confusing for someone who's not used to looking at things with a lot of pictures on them, but it could play like a scene where you've used the coverage to try and make the timing of the lines and the emotionality of the scene work. And then the challenge after that, which is where the assistants come in, is you have to take that performance cut and break it out into what they call camera loads over there, which are essentially intricately constructed performance edits that are passed over to the lab to create. And Shaw has a really good way of describing the sensation of being out on a stage and watching someone shoot cameras on a scene and where there's no actors physically in front of them. But the way you think about it is like a video game where you're playing a character that's on your TV screen, and there's a full 360-degree field of what they can do. We do that with actors as if they're out on a stage in a virtual environment that Jim has a window into with his virtual camera and can shoot any coverage he wants. And those clips can be looped over and over and over, and Jim can shoot from any angle and sort of riff and improvise and figure out how he wants to cover the scene without having to worry about, and Steve did such a great job explaining this, things like actors hitting their focus marks, or losing the sunlight in an outdoor shoot, or the things that you would usually have to contend with on a physical production, or actors not like delivering a great performance on a take that the camera bumped in a bad way, or you don't have to worry about any of those variables. So we build those performance loads and the editors prescribe it out, that we're going to break the scene into these performance bits, and Jim wants to have different takes that he can choose from as maybe alternate performance selects if he wants to pull in on the day. And then we can send those over to our internal vendor, and Shaw and his team, and also our picture assistant team would help with this as well, with a series of locators on each track that describe to a ingest pipeline what character and source motion, so the character model and the source motion from this take assembled in this particular order at any particular time, comma, for each character in the scene, comma, maybe separately from their body and face. So we have to describe these things that go into our lab with an AAF pipeline that then get parsed out and turned into three-dimensional scenes using Autodesk, a proprietary built version of Autodesk Motion Builder and Maya that then gets put through its paces and brought back out to the camera stage for Jim. And Shaw can speak to the trials and tribulations of having to make sure that your locators are spot on with the language. Otherwise, the ingest code is going to miss, or glitch out. And it was an interesting process for sure to go through.
Well, let's because there's a ton of stuff here that just needs unpacking, because at the moment I can see heads exploding. One of them being my own. Like so just pulling this back a little bit. Like it's essentially the film was directed twice. Once to get the performances, and once to use those performances to create the shots.
Mm-hmm.
That's correct.
Yeah. And then additionally, in a cut pass, because Jim is also an expert editor and would work with the editors very closely on using the cameras that he had shot and directed, as you say, to their greatest effect. And one of the coolest things at that phase is if he sees coverage or comes up with an idea that he is inspired to go do, all that has to be done is pull up those same files out on stage, and he can go do a camera that fits in better with the way the cut is now working, when they have it in shape, and it really sort of ties the whole thing together perfectly. It's very cool that you don't have to get a production crew swung together, and you don't have to get the actors scheduled. You just pull a file up on a stage and can go pick it off. And that's also a really fascinating and amazing thing to have as a capability.
I mean, can maybe sure you can talk a little bit more to that as well then, and how that starts to work a little bit further in the process.
Yeah, I mean, I think Yates is doing such a good job at explaining from the inception to once it gets into our world. But yeah, I'm trying to think about where exactly, because it's so funny with the 5 years that we worked on this film, and it's like you go through these processes of, the inception of the R&D process, and then things are working, and then we finally got, actors out there, and then now we're going into, cameras with Jim, and then eventually, you start turning over scenes and things like that nature, and they start coming back from Weta. It's just there was such a time gap between that and the process too, where we shot two films at the same time. That was another daunting task, that the production had to deal with. But yeah, as far as, I would speak about what the timeline looked like, and it's again without it visually being in front of us. It looked.
Yeah.
We're talking how we actually had to contact Avid to have them add more availability of tracks into
Yeah,
the media
that was.
composer.
I was just about to say, on the first movie, 24 was the maximum, and when we started, 24 was the maximum. And then we in our conversations with Avid, we were able to explain to them how we need to keep these, stacks, we called them, of reference cameras that with all these characters could become far more than 24 tracks tall. And so then they changed the limit to 64. And then I remember a specific email where I said, well, was 64 a technical limit, or did you just figure that was enough? Because we'll take more if you got them. And they said, no, it's a theoretical limit. So then they upped it to 99. And I remember telling the crew when 99 was possible, they all just sort of went, oh my God, no. They were like, 64 is enough. Let's not go past that, that
I
limit.
remember getting the 64 tracks, and then it was not soon after that we were like, this is not enough.
Oh
Yeah. Yeah.
And
So
what's on those tracks is essentially every iteration of any render that we got back for that specific shot, and then all the reference that's attributed to that shot as well. And then also if there's a live action plate, which obviously Spider was the live action element in most of the film, or there was some sort of back reference track that Jim wanted to reference while he was doing a review of something that he liked from another movie. That was also something that would live in that area from time to time. But again, it's just we're trying to retain 5 years or 5.5 years of what the
yeah,
evolution of a shot was. Because you see it at its inception form, and it could have been something that was shot in 2017, and
Right.
And then we don't, and then there's additions to that shot throughout the whole process, whether there's new FPR shot, or if there's anything that, like again the live action plate that wasn't quite shot at that moment. So it's sort of the
right.
evolution of the whole thing.
So
That's a great point, Shaw. There's some scenes that include capture from 2017, a live action plate from 2020, and then an FPR from 2022, and it's all in one scene.
yeah,
And we have to keep that all in the reference tracks.
yes, and we also have to keep, as Shaw said, a history that's easy for ourselves to sort of, as easy as possible. I won't say it was easy to remember, but you have to be able to call back information when it comes up in a discussion, because invariably you might have turned something over to the lab, and they're building it for you, and it's 2.5 years after you sent it. So they'll have questions for you about, why did you build it this way, or can we adjust it that way? And you have to be able to try and remember something that you did 2.5 years ago, and why you did it that particular way.
Do we remember? Do we know? I completely lost track. But as far as terabytes on the ISIS.
Oh, well, yeah, that was another thing. Is we had so when and Steve and John talked about this. Depending on which stage we were on, we would have anywhere between 12 and 16 reference cameras shooting in HD and a few in 4K on every take. And so what we worked out at the beginning was, with the brilliant an incomparable Ryan Champney was a system where he would auto-generate using a proprietary script quads and matrices, as Jim would call them, the matrix files, which were a 16-up display that had every reference camera labeled and available, and his A camera, which was what Jim would shoot as his virtual camera during the performance capture state. So we had these stacked under the camera renders at all times, so that you could go back and see what the performance was there. Because sometimes, even though the template renders had kabukis and you could sort of tell, the emotional nuance of the performance wouldn't come back in full really until you saw what Weta had done with it in their facial system. And so sometimes we'd have to go back and pull the reference camera up and make a picture-in-picture to display the actual range of the amazing performance that Zoe or Sam or Sig or any of those amazing people that we had in the movie were giving at that moment, so that you really felt it better. And then also so that when Weta was giving things back, we could easily change which track we were monitoring for Jim and show him, like, hey, that look was actually in there. You know, it just, you couldn't see it in the kabuki or things like that. You always had to be able to call back to the reference cameras and have them be perfectly accurate at any given time.
And something to touch onto that, to go back to the assistants on stage, is we are when we were out on stage during the performance capture shoots, we would be live having the assistants on stage would have to be live checking all of the reference cameras as they came in, so that the sync was always there, so that by the time the day was done, all the dailies would be processed by the end of the day, the performance capture dailies, to then get passed off to the editors to then work and cut with, either that day or the next morning.
And to help us with that, because we're, you know, avid, and these data recording systems are being done in a Linux environment with a lot of complex and proprietary stuff going on. We brought on a guy named Donald Day to start a department that would help us adjust sync if the time code had been off from the jamming from one camera to another. And it was not uncommon for Ben and you know, Gretchen, Layla, Ben, Emma, whoever's out there, to have to order a bunch of restripes to sync up all these different angles in the matrix and the quads. So we had a department that started and grew and became our sort of render wrangling department over time, and full of some other amazingly helpful people. But it was interesting, and it's one of the amazing things about working on this project is you don't always know exactly what you need when you're starting to figure out how to pull something off. But everybody, if you came up with a system that made sense to help you pull it off, and you pitched the idea, you could get approval to do something like create a department that didn't exist before to help facilitate a missing part of the pipeline. And that was also a really, really fun and awesome environment to be in, to be able to have that sort of support and open-mindedness.
I mean, the pipeline stuff. It sounds huge, and something that obviously has evolved over time. And I actually want to come back to that in a little bit, and I want to sort of take some other sort of practical ideas about how that data started flowing from you know, throughout the years of the performance to the you know, to the edit, to the out through
Right.
to the different departments. But
Right. So
before we do any of that, though, I do have a little bit of business to do. So we're going to take a very, very short break, and I'm going to go and give away some stuff, and then we'll come back and we'll talk more, because I know I've got hundreds of questions still. Fish back hell, but you know, we will see what we will see. I think let's say hello to the YouTube audience. If you're enjoying what you're seeing so far, give us a big thumbs up. That is the only price for admission to the Boris FX live streams. We are live. We are doing all of this live. I mean, it looks like something that's been professionally edited, I know, but no, we are strangely enough doing all of this by the seat of our pants. So thank you very much so far. We are also going to be giving away some prizes today. I know we have a copy of Silhouette to give away. We also have a Wacom Intuos Pro medium tablet to give away to one lucky winner as well. And I also have a copy of the Boris FX Suite to give away sometime later today too. And that's everything we'll make, including Silhouette, Mocha, Continuum, Sapphire, Optics. It's the whole shebang. We're going to be giving away a year subscription to one lucky winner. But before we do that, I'm going to ask Mission Control if they can start rolling the huge tombola to start giving away the prize. So all people have had to do is go to borisfxlive.com, scroll down to the bottom of the page, and enter in their details in the handy dandy little box there. So if we have our tombola ready, let's start spinning it and win and draw our first name. So who is going to be our first winner? Without any sort of drum roll, we're going to go straight to Lee Wilson. Lee Wilson, congratulations. You are our lucky winner of the Intuos Pro, the Wacom Intuos Pro medium. Here, if we cut back, I'm gonna have one of your. So well done. Congratulations to you, Lee. There is still time to join our giveaways. Yes, just go to borisfxlive.com and scroll down to the bottom of the page there. But I'm going to go back to our guests now, and I'm going to ask Steve, can you hear me?
I hope so. Can you
Oh my
guys
God,
see
it's
me?
brilliant. We can
Come
see you,
on.
we can
Hey,
hear
Steve.
you. This is
Hi,
It's
guys.
this is
working.
technology.
I moved. That's what it took to get this.
Oh my.
I
Oh my.
moved. Hey, so I have been listening. So brilliantly done. Thank you, Ben. One
You're
of the things
welcome.
that we talked about doing before was to kind of walk through a scene, kind of the life of a scene.
Yes.
Now, the typical life of a scene on a movie, you might be talking about a workflow that lasts for a couple of weeks, a couple of months. We're talking about a much longer time frame for you guys. So what would be a good scene to talk about, and then walk us through from beginning to end that process?
I think there's two different types of scenes you could talk about here. There's definitely a full all performance capture based scene where all the characters would be Navi or humanoid. And then there's another scene, which is one that would be live action that incorporates CG or humanoid Navi character elements. So let's start with a simple one, which is the one that I know the editors use a lot in examples, is Jake and Neytiri talking in their hut before they have to move to the Reef Village. So that starts off as a scene with Sam and Zoe working in our volume here at Manhattan Beach Studios. And we will record that in the performance capture volume with the 16 different reference cameras. Once that footage gets to the editors, they then edit the performance edit, which Justin has talked about earlier. And then from there, Jim and the editors decide on what the performance edit's going to be. And then once that is locked, that is just the performance of the scene, where it's that they're not worried about camera coverage or anything else. It's just the actor's intent. And that's got to be freeing for Jim and the editors and even the actors on the day. They don't have to worry about like, all right, it's my close-up now. I got to do this for my close-up. They can just experiment and try whatever they want as they're going along.
Yeah.
And then Justin did talk about turning over, once the performance edit's locked, turning those loads over to the lab. And then from there, once our internal lab processes that, it's then turned into this virtual stage play. And then that's what Jim will shoot on his virtual camera. And at that point, that's when the editors get dailies in the traditional sense, but it's all virtual. It's like PlayStation 2 graphics. And then we'll bring those in. The assistants will bring this in as Jim's shooting. And it's he'll shoot things at different speeds. And so I should talk about this, where he'll say like, all right, I'm going to shoot this take in half speed. And then we'll get those clips and we'll bring them in, but we'll have to apply a speed effect onto those clips so that they are play at normal speed. And we're bringing in and syncing the audio and passing out more or less string outs to the editors as they're live editing these scenes so that Jim can go over to the editors and ask them, you know, like, hey, I just shot this thing, you know, like, how does it look in the cut? How does it look in the scene right now? And more or less, they're building what will actually turn into the scene that the audience will see on screen later. And they're shooting that as we go along. And then eventually, sorry.
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions about that process. I think I heard Justin mention that performance capture from the very beginning, that could be something where, you know, one actor is from take 3 and the other actor is from take 1, or half of it could be from take 1 and the other half could be take 3. So it's not even just the best take of 2 actors. It's specific takes and specific moments that are pieced together to create a single performance.
Yeah, I mean, one of the hardest things to sort of wrap your brain around when you get into this workflow as an editor and is how flexible everything is and how anything is possible. Because normally, you know, Steve, you work with live action footage, and what shot is what you have, and you can manipulate it to a certain extent. You can split screen, you can use time warps to try and manipulate timing for the A and B side of an edit. But in here, in the first phase, we're not even talking about cutting patterns. We're talking about performance only. We're constructing the best bits of what the actors have given over many performances to construct what Jim considers as the ideal performance, and also to preserve accurately. You know, you don't want to get too crazy with things because the actors give such incredible performances, but there's complications because of the way something was performed with different actors at different times. You know, the normal headaches do come in where maybe Zoe was performing against a troupe actor and not Sam on a particular day, and you have to combine that together. So it's there's a number of things, and then also stunts come into play, and like Justin was talking about, constraints of the volume where you're sort of you can't run, you know, a football field's length far, and you're supposed to run across a football field length of the forest or something. So you're constructing all of these things so that they work in the camera coverage that will be designed later. So you're doing blocking, and it's all virtual blocking, but you're doing blocking and you're doing performance editing too. It's a stage in advance where you can do anything that's required, really. And that's going back to the John Rafua quote from the Art of the Cut interview. A guy like Jim, who has a mind to be able to keep track of all of these minute details in such a clear way in his head, can use that to really powerful effect to make sure that he's optimizing every single moment, or, you know, squeezing out the gold, as I've heard him say a couple of times. You know, even though the performance itself might have been excellent, this little tweak takes it to an even more excellent place. And we can do that where in a live action film, if it's not in the footage, you don't have it, you know?
And that's the FRP or FPR that you were talking about, right? The facial replacement, which is like ADR, right?
It's like ADR, you just capture the face and body alongside it, so that if you decide that line, you know, in the new performance is so good that you want to feature it, then you have the face and body data to put them into the scene. Yeah.
That's incredible. Does it change the coverage at all? Like a typical coverage, of course, if you want to run through the whole scene, you wouldn't just tell an actor, just, hey, we're in your close-up, just say the last line, right? You'd want them to do everything. But did it actually change the way coverage was because you didn't have to worry about performance, or no?
So during the performance edit, there were a lot of conversations between Jim and the editors about coverage. So, I don't want to say there was no thought given during performance capture to when something might be a close-up, but it was not. It was captured in a way to keep everything flexible. So they'd run through the whole scene mostly the whole time. And then in the performance edit is where Jim and the editors are having conversations about, I think we'd be close here for this line. I think we'd be in a close-up, and then for here, I think I'd be in a wide shot. But the thing that you don't want to do is lock yourself into something like that without the ability to change your mind when you're out on the stage shooting the cameras. So we would still have to build these camera loads, in a close-up, if it's just me, I'm the only one who has to be in the scene file. But if that moment might also be wide, then if there's 10 people behind, off to my left, I have to account for them even in the close-up moment. So when we would build these camera loads that would be sent over to the lab, we had to make sure to account for everybody almost in a 360-degree way for any given moment, because you just can't guarantee that, because in some meeting, 3 years ago, he said he might want to do this in close-up, that's what it's going to be when he's out there, really getting into it and figuring out the scene. So,
and just to explain too, a camera load, the camera loads were specific to that, what you're talking about, Steve, which was a moment sometimes. So there was basically the master. There was the master, which was all the great performances, and it was all the full coverage of the scene, so that Jim knew that he had everything that he needed for that specific scene. But then there were some one-offs where it was like, this is going to be specific for this specific, this specific moment. So when we talk about camera loads, there were multiple loads on a per scene basis that some were focused in on some, emotional things or something that Jim had, expressed earlier before they made it to stage.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And some scenes could have just one camera load, and other scenes could have maybe 45 camera loads, and they all had to be ready and turned over from the editors and us all over to our internal lab, and they would have to build them and have them ready for when Jim went down to shoot his virtual cameras for the scene.
Right. So in the 2091 scene, going back to the life of a scene example, that was actually one of the first scenes that made it all the way through. I think that was in turnover 1, right, Justin? So it looks like he's going to go check. But
Sorry, my son was crying.
Oh, it's okay.
Aw.
Sorry, Jordan. So we'd have the performance scene, and then we'd turn over loads that it's Jim, it's Jake and Neytiri in the hut, and we followed the very meticulously specified notes that Jim had given during our dailies review process, which we didn't really talk about, but we did have a very robust dailies review pipeline where Jim would be able to watch back all the capture for every scene and call out the performance moments that he liked, or maybe a line that he wanted to lose in the performance edit, stuff like that. And then we would build the performance edits, and then he would review the performance edits and approve, and then we would get to the camera load. So when you get to the point where everything's locked and you've built the loads, you send those out to the lab using the locators and AAF's infrastructure that we talked about earlier on. They bring those in and publish them into our pipeline. Then the sequence teams and the artists over there would take those files, and the motion edit team, who I cannot leave out because Don DeCastro is one of our true unsung heroes, and his motion edit team take these stitches that we think might work, but again, we're looking at 2 dimensions flat. And if a character is, if you're looking top down in 3 dimensions and you see a character's might work with his legs this way from this take and legs this way from that take, okay, we might stitch that together. But then we don't see on top down view that he's actually in a completely different part of the stage in the B side of the edit. So Don and his team would take these loads that we built and blend things and rectify these discrepancies to make everything look seamless and perfect. And just amazing motion edit team that we had at Lightstorm, and really lovely people also. So we'd send that through, and then the sequence team would put that in the right environment, get the right lighting in it, and tweak, the effects of the scene, or make, whatever creative adjustments they needed to make to these files to make them work narratively in 3D space. Then they'd go out to the stage and get QC'd by our multi-titled I don't even extraordinaire Richie Bainham, who would put these loads through their paces and basically emulate what Jim was going to maybe want to do to them, and then he would yeah 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 I think, I mean, we did have a first AD on through the whole time, Maria Battle Campbell, who we all love very dearly and does an amazing job in some very tricky circumstances. But I think his title, he was virtual second unit director, he got credited as something like that. So he was doing a pass at the scene, but it was sort of like an editor's assembly, Steve. It was not like, this is what I think the scene has to be. It was, let's explore the scene for all these different possible coverage options that are possible, and put together an assembly to show Jim, to say, based on your A cameras and based on your performance cut, these are, the loads that you can use to get all these different varieties of coverage that you might want. So then that would be presented to Jim, and it came to be called an RCP cut, which was rough camera pass or Ritchie camera pass, depending on which point in time you were asking anybody. But those were instrumental in the process, and it was a really cool thing also as an assistant to get to participate in. And Layla Wolf did a great job covering Ritchie remotely through lockdown for such a long time, where he's always calling out, hey, can I take a look at this, or can we take a look at the load, or can we take a look at this thing I shot 6 months ago that we have to go back into. And he's needing to see reference for things pulled up very quickly. And Layla and everybody who was out on stage covering Ritchie did an amazing job of facilitating him. And if you ever meet him, he's sort of a highly energetic, rapid fire sort of guy. So, you have to be quick on your feet and quick to respond. And everybody just did an amazing job facilitating that part of the process, which was instrumental to Jim ultimately then taking those QC'd loads, and then he might go in a different direction completely than what was done in the RCP phase, but the files are put together for him to be able to, and he understands how they're put together to be able to manipulate it however he needs to once he's out there shooting the scene again. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep,
exactly.
All that.
And
Go ahead,
Richie's communicating. Yeah, Richie's communicating with the editors too. So say if they turn over a load with a bunch of stitches and something doesn't work, Richie will QC that load and then communicate with the editors, and they're like, I think we need to reorder this load. And so the editors will then go back and adjust their performance edit or their camera loads as such to make sure that the loads then get properly, or that the loads will be QC'd and working for when Jim goes out there to shoot.
Got it.
Yeah. And so then at that point, Jim's cameras come in, and then you can start cutting the movie.
Well, he's still got to choose, right? So I'm assuming that he is on a virtual stage. Is he wearing a virtual headset?
No, he's got. It looks like the world's coolest, souped-up Nintendo Switch in his hand, and it's got a screen on it, and it's got motion trackers to orient it in the volume. And he's using it, and I'm sure you've seen in the behind-the-scenes footage, which you can find on Disney Plus and YouTube and all sorts of places. It's really well put together by Mobscene and our guys in Sector 5. Klish, Robbie, Sam.
Yeah, there's a shot of it right
Nate
there.
and Jeff. Yeah. So he can walk around with that thing, and that's his viewport into the 3D scene that's been mapped out onto the motion capture floor. And when he likes it better than VR because he's able to maneuver it and also keep his bearings about where he actually is on the floor at any given time. And he can, if he's trying to get this shot, but there's a tree in the way, or, the lighting rig needs to get adjusted because now something's bouncing the wrong way, he can have that manipulated by the operators out on the stage and essentially redo some of the load building that had been done previously. Which brings us to another round tripping process of the files that Jim shoots have to be delivered in the representation of the sync that he might have adjusted back to us in editorial, so that when we get his virtual cameras rendered out, we also know exactly how the motion is, because now it might not match what we turned over exactly. So we have to get it redelivered to us, and we used AAFs again and a locator-driven, marker-driven pipeline from our internal system that we could bring in, drag into a bin. It's already linking to our media that we have in our Nexus, and it shows us in the timeline, stacked perfectly and stitched perfectly together, the render and then all the necessary performance reference on top of it. And we then would use those to say, okay, these are the new loads from Jim's cameras, which then once Jim and the editors decide on a cut, this is the scene, right? So 2091, this is the scene. And a lot of the times we don't want the editors, while they're in their creative headspace trying to figure out the right way to play a scene, worrying about 20, 30 tracks of reference cameras and keeping them in sync. So a lot of times those will get sort of discarded temporarily. They do their creative work, and then we begin a process that I think Ben should speak to a lot, which is called Weta prep. That's what we called it, which is the overall gist of it is using the source record power of Avid to rebuild and conform the reference cameras back in to a cut scene so that it could be vetted properly, make sure everything looks great and is working as it should across the cuts and everything, and then ultimately pass to Justin and his team to then turn it over to Weta. So Ben, you want to talk about Weta prep?
Absolutely. But before I do, I wanted to mention one other thing about the virtual camera dailies process, which is the fact that the audio for all of these things are things that we have to keep track of and build. So we are not using the virtual camera audio that's being recorded. While that is supplied to the virtual camera stage from when we turn over the performance edit loads, when we get the renders back in, we are having to more or less cut in the audio, and Jim can slip characters in timing for performance reasons, for camera coverage reasons. And then we will have to make the audio adjustments as such.
Yeah.
But we have all of those based off of our performance edits, which are tied to reference takes. So we're keeping track of that. And the main reason for that, which will lead into the Weta prep discussion, is the fact that when a scene is turned over, we need to know that the audio is in sync with the facial performance capture.
Yeah.
And so we'll have synced audio clips to the original reference performance capture takes. So when a scene is turned over, an editor may slip a line, but if the line is on that performer's face or that actor's face, we need to know that it's in sync. And if it's not in sync, we can then order that character's face to become in sync. And we do all that during our Weta prep turnover process.
Right. And just to go back to,
yeah,
this is where the 64 track timeline comes in, and where the sort of skyscraper tall historical, it's like, you know, archaeologists, when they dig, there's striations of dirt that tell them how old something is. Well, think about Weta prep as like a rock sample from an archaeologist, where you can see from the cut that Jim first turned over to all the reference to the final cameras that are going to get sent over to Weta, and all the changes and iterations that have gone on throughout. You can kind of scroll up and navigate through all of that. And we're only going to be able to overview briefly that process, but it was very intricately constructed. Sorry, Ben, keep going. You're doing a great job explaining.
And well, thank you. You're doing a great job too. We're all doing a great job. So a scene like the Jake and Neytiri scene, there's only 2 characters and a couple of our kid characters off camera outside the hut. So we'll have to keep track in these Weta prep, because this is what we're going to use to turn over to Weta, and they're going to reference this for the characters. That's only 2 characters more or less on screen at a time. But then there's a couple of scenes later when they arrive at the Reef Village, where the family arrives at the Reef Village, where there's hundreds of characters in that scene. So we have to keep track of more or less all of that. We're primarily focused on the main characters, the Solis and Mekaina with Tonawari and Ronal, and the characters who are talking. But we do have to eventually turn over to Weta all of the background characters, hundreds of background characters. We have to make sure that those characters' performances are accurate, and that they're not, say, doing something prior to action or post action. In all
we have to vet all the faces for the hero background that you can see. And I created with our software development team some very cool renders that, if you shuttle through the frames, would highlight a character in yellow and then put up a HUD over their heads to say what actor it was and what performance it was from, so that we could then check back on the reference camera for that performance and see what that person is doing. And a lot of it was background tiles. You know, we don't have to hand select all 300 people or however many were in that scene, but you do need to be able to go look at those background tiles and make sure, like Ben said, that you're not accidentally using some, piece where the characters aren't doing something that reflects what is happening in the scene in front of them. So it was a very interesting challenge from, like Ben said, a 2-person scene where it's fairly straightforward to, actually, I think probably the most complicated one was the kids' capture in the forest, where all the bad guys and the kids are all being held on, by each other and contacting each other, and Spider is a live action element, and a virtual character is holding his arm. I remember vetting for that taking a few days to build, multiple assistants, splitting up the scene, taking a few days to build, and then taking a few days for the editors to go through the vetting process to make sure that everything was, from a continuity perspective and from a contact point perspective, working as it needed to be. That was probably one of the more intense motion vetting scenes that we had in movie 2. Even though it's not a few hundred characters, there's a lot of aspects of it that made it super, super complex.
Absolutely. And I think that's a great point to talk about the live action, talking about live action production for this, because that's definitely one of those scenes. One of the more complicated ones. And so the scene with Jake and Neytiri and even the flight to the Reef Village scenes were all CG character scenes. But then when we went to go into live action, a majority of the time Jim would have done his camera pass, his virtual camera pass on the scene. And then we knew which shots we had to shoot the live action elements for. So we would be in New Zealand now on the live action stage, and Jim would have more or less this template roadmap for where he would want to shoot his live action camera coverage. But there's also an extra element to that where it's not just he's shooting this scene and he's shooting this shot and that's it. While that was the case for some of the time, he may want to explore in there. And we haven't really talked about simulcam at all, but we would, on our live action stage, he has this simulcam where he can more or less see 3D characters as he's shooting as this extra element.
Yeah, I mean,
there's
that
this
was
whole
one of
camera
the
system.
one of the more amazing things that Ryan and Dayon and Weta and LEI put together was this live depth compositing system, which used a left and a right eye camera on the front of each camera rig to create a live depth map that would get fed back into our camera pipeline and tell the virtual motion builder system where this live action character was in relation to all the other CG characters in the scene, and would live occlude the CG characters. And anybody who's ever tried to integrate CG and has probably used Boris's amazing tools to roto people's arms and corners of their bodies and whatever back into a shot, because now there's a CG whatever that's occluding them but is actually supposed to be behind them. Jim could see in real time as he's shooting where these characters are oriented in depth space, so that, you know, if Kiri is behind Spider and Loak is in front of Spider, Loak is occluding him but Kiri is not. And it was a pretty incredible thing to witness, and you know, I think is going to be a really powerful tool for virtual production people going forward. But, you know, to get there on this project took a really long time, and we worked really closely with the simulcam team and the super sequence teams inside the lab to turn over, like Ben said. At this point, the scenes had a cut, and Jim didn't want to go back to the source loads, which may have been far longer than what is now in the scene for any particular moment. He wanted to shoot his camera coverage more or less off the cut. So we had to turn over a whole new set of loads that matched the cut sequence. And that means turning over new audio that matched the cut sequence, and then feeding that picture and audio into the eyeline system that I'm sure everybody's seen now, where there's a little floating iPad moving around, so that the eyeline system knew which facial videos to pull at what time and have that be in sync with audio that comes from the edit, not from some database that it's pulling from.
That's amazingly complex.
So we had to do
one of the things that I was thinking about when I asked the question about, the little, the device that he was using to shoot with, is I'd seen that footage before, but the characters are actually there. Now, when he's using that device, right, the performances are all finished, correct? Or do I have this wrong?
Yep, that's after the performance edit phase, and it's been QC'd, and the loads have been built, and now they're put out on the motion capture stage, and he is seeing an invisible world that's in front of him that nobody can see with their naked eye, but because he's got this camera, he can move around and see, this character's over here and that character's over there, and if I want to pan or if I want to dolly behind them, there's all sorts of controls where he's able to do things like that.
Yeah, it was just
absolutely.
The BTS footage shows an actual actor in a suit there with Jim, and those people do not exist at that point.
No, so in performance capture, the reference camera operators would be shooting their reference camera, but Jim would have the virtual camera live, and he would do what we came to refer as an A camera, because every camera we shot had a letter and a number. And so the A cameras will only ever correspond to a performance capture take. And what he was doing is exploring how he might want to shoot the scene later. And it was actually a pretty good roadmap at points for how he would eventually shoot the scene later. there'd be moments throughout the performance capture take where he was in a very similar angle to what ended up in the final movie. And so the editors had to pay really close attention to those cameras at all times to sort of make sure to glean whatever insight from them he could as possible. But so that's what he's shooting when there's actors in front of him. But then he goes back later on and does all this very specific coverage to these fully rendered camera loads when the actors aren't there, and it's just him and that virtual camera and an empty room with a few people behind him on a brain bar operating the computers that control the whole thing.
Got it. And Ben has not finished right yet getting us all the way through that opening scene, right? We've only delivered it to Weta.
Yeah.
Well,
no,
we've done
so
Weta prep on it, right?
Yeah, we've done Weta prep where we're all the
Weta prep.
assistants. We check sync on every character, make sure all the sync's correct. We check for continuity. So say making sure that, you know, Jake's standing in, you know, the B side of one shot and then the A side of the next shot, he's also standing.
Yeah.
There's a lot of continuity fixes. Yeah.
How many times have you cut something where on your A angle, the actor's hands are up here, and on the B angle, they're resting on the table? Well, in this environment, you can fix that. You can take the motion from the previous shot and roll it backwards to a point and make a new stitch to eradicate or change the timing of this so that you don't have those, you know, Thelma Schoonemaker, who cares about this continuity problems. we cared very much about those continuity problems, and we fixed all of them that we could find.
Yeah, that changes the whole Walter Murch, you know, 6 things you got to worry about in an edit. There's 2 of them at least are thrown right out the window, the last 2.
Yeah. Absolutely. And while all of our editorial motion vetting process is happening, our internal lab has also been given an EDL and AAF of the scene, and they're doing all their costume updates, prop background updates, background character
models,
and all these other things,
lighting simulations.
And we're getting those. And we're getting all those different iterations of each shot, and that's what's being stacked in the Weta prep, along with all the character reference.
We had a very specific set of terms for when something was final for turnover inside of LEI, and that meant a final camera, final lighting, final motion. Effects were not final in LEI, but they were gestured, and that the in and out points and the source motion was cleaned up to a certain degree. So when Weta got this, and the cool part about this production that does not exist on any production I've ever worked on is that we were working in Weta's proprietary software package. So our files that we sent to them were actually their file types, and actually they, you know, so they got it like at such an elevated point and opened it up, and they didn't even have to translate it. It was like me sending you an AAF, Steve, with media that you already have. So that was what was kind of awesome about the whole thing is inside of the LEI lab, we took these scenes to such an elevated point where you're not talking about looking at grayscale animation passes that are coming back. When Weta gets it, they have final motion, they have to tweak, they have to do simulations and animation for hair and face muscles and things that we can't accommodate in our pipeline. But those shots are the shots. And they do what they need to do and render them out and solve all the problems with water and all kinds. I mean, they did some amazing and complicated things. But the one thing a lot of the times that they did not have to figure out that on other visual effects projects, vendors usually sometimes have involvement with is the content of the scenes. So
what kind of software is this that's doing these translations? You've got all this metadata, you've got all this visual data, and you're sending it all from Avid to Weta in this package. What's doing that?
The phases were all AAF driven, and so out of Avid we would do an AAF with the very specific locator instructions, and then our amazingly brilliant development team inside of Lightstorm, headed by Dan Neufeld, Elspeth Craig, Emo and Morin, and several other Tanner and all these other people. I mean, they sound like a big team, but they were actually probably 9 or 10 people deep at any given point. And they designed a way to parse and read an AAF and translate it into these motion programs called Atlas and Motion Builder that would then take our instructions and pull in all the necessary assets using a system called upfront continuity that was tended to by the art department, and assemble this scene together that then a sequence supervisor would open, called a capture package, that had all the motion in it, and it had all the assets needed for the environment and the lighting packages from the lighting team, and then they would have those things at their disposal to manipulate and fix. I mean, the assemble probably got, you know, them anywhere from 50 to 80% there, and then they really had to go in and make it work. But it would put all the assets together for them so that they didn't have to start from the beginning, which was very cool. And then on the round trip side, they could send an AAF back to us from their motion builder timeline that, like I said, would translate to our Avid media that we had in our Nexus project. So we had, using an AAF and locators and a very specific code language between the two, we could talk to one another. And then on the Weta turnover side, the lab and the sequence artists and the motion builder team were using the programs that Weta ultimately uses in their facility. So they were just shipping assets and media and these capture packages over to Weta to then be ingested and opened on their side.
Yeah, so
Yes, thank you. Yeah, because we've got I've got like 1,000 questions from chat already, and we also have to give some stuff away. But I think, like, if we can get a few of the quick questions done,
Sure.
I think that'd be really nice. One of the things that is coming up quite a bit is the 64 tracks. I mean, that's apparently something that has struck the soul of a lot of editors out there.
Yeah.
And like, even from a practical point of view, like how are you watching those? Are you turning your monitor on its side? Are you scrolling up and down?
No, yeah. So I mean, everybody has their own Avid layout, and it's personal. And so I never try and intrude on how people lay out their timeline and their composer, because that's how your brain works, and I'm not trying to tell you how to make sense of it. But we came up with, and there were revisions to this process, but what we decided on for our reels was that the first 18 tracks were the cut, right? And then there were mats, and then there were a couple of picture-in-picture tracks. So as far as Jim is concerned, and the editors are concerned, the first 18 tracks are the virtual renders, the live action plates, the things that, like, you would view. If you were screening, you would monitor track 18, and it was also always called the play here track. Above that were all the reference builds, and that's what takes up. And then sometimes, Shaw, you would put Weta delivery versions up in there too that we wanted to keep handy but didn't want to have in the, like, live area. So it was sort of like, here's the movie, and then here's all the background data for the movie, and at any given time you could blow away that background data above track 18 and play the film. And so that's how it was sort of segmented out to make it usable for Jim and for everybody who, like, doesn't have one of, like you said, one of those horizontal monitors to read like a code script or something like that.
Yeah, and we would only add those references above the cuts and the tracks above once the scene was locked. So if the scene wasn't locked, we weren't keeping track of all of that stuff at that point.
We had milestones where we went and looked at the reference, and one of the last milestone where the reference made it into the reel was Weta turnover. So
yeah, and a lot of what those reference tracks are for in the multiple is we're making sure that the audio is in sync with the actual mocap performance of the performer when they shot it on the day. And then also you got, a live action element, or, anything to do with FPR. Like if sometimes Jim wanted the actual, I don't know if you guys can see it in some of that footage, but they actually had, there was a camera that was mounted on the side of those helmets, and it was directly right on their faces, and that's where they have the dots on their faces, because they need as much information on those emotional moments as possible, and they could track that into the computer. So we can see it right there with Zoe and Sam. They've got, and right there with right there in the front. So a lot of times we would ingest that performance because they really wanted to see, because maybe the reference camera that they shot on the day was blocked, or they didn't get exactly what they, as far as the angle was concerned. And Jim really wanted to see what the real performance was. So we would include that in a reference track as well. So, and obviously the more people, the more people in the scene, the more reference tracks. If it's just a two-person scene, obviously, it becomes less and less from there. So basically you're going to see this, it looks like Tetris, inside of our Avid Media Composer.
Yeah. And that's why we landed with the bottom of the timeline being the movie, because if we had put the movie on top, the actual renders would move like a heart rate monitor. And so you wouldn't know what track you're supposed to watch based on the number of reference tracks that I think on Avatar 1, the reference tracks were below the renders. But on this one, because of how many characters there were and the sort of variety from scene to scene, we moved that up to the top so that there was a consistent track to monitor to see the film itself.
And also the way that Avid works, how it reads, linearly. So it's basically everything that was above it. If we were monitoring track 18, which was basically the play track, it wasn't trying to run everything that was above it. It was just basically 18 and below. So that was another thing that we learned from Avatar 1 to Avatar 2 is, Gaudio's like, I think we should build the reference above it instead of below it, because it's really bogging down the system, and it really worked to our advantage.
Excellent. Yeah, well, I think that definitely answers that question. I think we'll come back to some of the other questions after the next section. But I just want to say, stick around, please. We are watching Boris FX Live, and we are talking with some of the editorial team for Avatar: The Way of Water with Art of the Cuts, Steve Hullfish. If you're enjoying what you're watching so far, there is a price to pay, I'm afraid, and that price is clicking the little thumbs up button. That is it. That's all we ask of you. It costs you absolutely nothing, but it does help us out. It does some strange voodoo in the background, which I'm not 100% sure of what it is, but apparently it is very important. We've got some stuff to give away. For a lot of people, they have been heading over to borisfxlive.com to scroll down to the bottom of the page, because there we have a lovely handy dandy competition entry form where we're giving away, well, we've already given away a Wacom Intuos Pro to a lucky viewer, and we still have a 1-year subscription to Silhouette and a 1-year subscription to the Boris FX Suite, which is everything we make, including Sapphire, Continuum Mocha Pro, Continuum Optics, the whole deal. So this is the big one. But I think, do we have a Silhouette competition winner? Let's see. This is the thing. So one person is going to be walking away from today's live stream with a 1-year subscription of Silhouette. That's a $795 value going to one lucky winner, and that lucky winner is rolling the tombola, mission control. The lucky winner is, we don't know. This is the joys of vamping. Maybe the lucky winner's me. I mean, maybe the lucky winner is all of us. Maybe Silhouette were the friends that we met along the way. I think that's all it could be. Yeah. All I said, like I knew we had a winner. We had a winner, and yet there they are. It's the Roman numeral 1. So congratulations, 1. You have won. You've absolutely won. There we go. All right, maybe we'll come back to that. Okay, I think. I thought, I think maybe no. Ben's he's not eligible. I've just had in my ear. I've just had in my ear that he's ineligible. But we do actually have a winner, and the winner is Rebecca Venton. Venton? I hope it's Venton, but her name is definitely Rebecca. Rebecca, congratulations! You have won our 1-year annual subscription to Silhouette. Don't worry about the sheer professionalism in awarding you the prize. We will actually be in contact with you very shortly to actually tell you how to claim it. So that's the easy bit. You've done the tricky bit by sitting through my rambling, trying to find your name. All right, but there is still a bit of time to join in our competition. I promise you the winner of the next prize is going to have their name shown on screen. So just head on over to borisfxlive.com and tippy tap your details into the box down there. All right, we're going to carry on with our chat with Steve Hullfish and the Avatar team, or a few of the Avatar team. And so if you have questions, I know I've got like handfuls of questions already.
Let's
Are those just your questions? Are those just your questions?
They're just my personal questions, yeah. But let's save those until a little bit later. So if you do have questions, type them away in chat right now, and we'll get to them in a little bit. But Steve, you have more questions as well, I hope.
Well, I wanted to. I don't think we're done with the taking one scene all the way through, right? We've only delivered it to Weta. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. So
I mean,
they do
from
their
our
magic,
perspective,
and then what happens?
Well, I mean, even delivering to Weta, I mean, I basically, what I do is I get all the lovely build from our editorial team on what they intend to send over to Weta, and I get an XML that I ingest into my count sheets, which basically parses out every single individual element which encompasses that shot. So it could be, Zoe's face, Zoe's body, Jake's face, Jake's body. If there's a live action element, we do that. We bring that in manually, which is just an exported CSV file that we also import into our count sheets. And I don't know, you're sort of like an accountant, right? So we were a no. There were no handles on this film, so everything had to be to cut length. So basically, you're looking at a lot of numbers, a lot of time code. You're comparing it to the Avid, and you're making sure that everything's lining up perfectly. The QC process by our editorial team, our assistants, was unbelievable. Everything that the VFX assistants did was amazing as well. So a lot of times what I'm doing is I'm adding, maybe there's another note that needs to be in there as well. So maybe an editor that something didn't make it into the shot, they want to add this as a note to Weta. Maybe there's some reference that we need to turn over that was specific towards Jim, where he says, I really liked an explosion that I saw in this specific movie, and I'll sort of make a note for that so that they know exactly what they're looking for. And then from there, it's me exporting an AF with all the Avid media so that they can bring that back to life over in Weta. And James Minkle was a pivotal part for me. He was my liaison over there as far as the VFX editor there. And it's Excel documents, it's EDLs, it's everything that gives them the ability to basically roadmap everything and where to find it. And also to pull the live action plates. We basically had everything stored at Park Road Post as far as live action's concerned, so they could pull all the high-res material for the artists to start working on. So essentially, we're just delivering them, not only the physical assets, but also anything to do with count sheets, Excel documents and things of that nature. So that's the.
And one of the things to keep in mind too, because you talk to the editors about FPR, right? So Justin might have turned the scene over in 2018, and then we might shoot FPR on it in 2021, and then he has to be able to update his count sheets and materials and tell Weta, how this is all being affected on something that they've all been working on over there for a really long time, and that we sent out the door a really long time ago. So it was a very complex thing to communicate, but we all had even before lockdown we had a Slack going, and then during lockdown we had a Slack going, but Slack became very instrumental for us in terms of being able to communicate in real time instructions and things like this, because we were moving so fast. I mean, it might seem like, hey, this thing took almost 6 years, it must have been really slow. It was not. I mean, it was everything was moving in so many different states concurrently. There was a lot of things to juggle, and to be able to communicate quickly with Justin and his team over there, like, hey, this shot needs a face update, or we're shooting this, this is changing, that's changing, we're changing the sync of this line. He needed to be able to receive that communication fast and get that out the door to Weta as quickly as possible, so that they didn't spend any time or resources working on something that was no longer relevant or no longer accurate. So
yeah, just because we turned over a scene didn't mean we had all the elements specifically for that shot to get finished. So a lot of times we were turning things over because they wanted to get started on the environments. A lot of the things that took a lot of time at Weta for them to get approvals on. So we would turn things over. I wouldn't call it premature. I would just say we would turn it over in order to get them looking at the scene right away, so that they can start making decisions.
They had a lot of R&D to do in a lot of different areas, so it was valuable to them to receive things at different states, especially with each different character and their model, and each different environment and that model, so that they could have those assets finished through the R&D and approvals process for rendering down the line. So
I don't want to get ahead of you guys, but have we gotten are we to getting the stuff back from Weta yet, or are we still getting stuff to Weta?
Okay, so let's just say Shaw's gone through his count sheets, and our friend Justin Odell in the visual effects department in the lab has sent over all of the shots that are in a particular scene. Weta gets started on their process, and then we start receiving. And I mean, it took a while from turnover one to receive things back for turnover one, where we were starting to review fairly regularly. But we would start receiving, Shaw would start receiving packages of turntables and still frames and look frames and character models and water simulations and fire simulations and all sorts of things that would then start to go in front of Jim to review with Weta and comment on. And I mean, it was as minute as how much skin ripple against the current underwater should there be at each velocity underwater. I mean, it was very meticulous, and all those things were worked out way in advance of the final shots needing to get rendered. And it was amazing to be in those conversations with guys like Jim and Joe Lettieri and Richie Bainham, who are just next level thinking about these things that you wouldn't think have anything to do with visual effects, because they're talking about how nasolabial folds, which is a term that I now know, interact with the top lip to make sure that mouth movement is not reading as false or uncanny valley, or light refraction or water fall off, or any number of things that they're talking about, just to get to the believability, the photographic, as John would always say, it doesn't have to be photoreal, because you can't say what looks real on Pandora, because nothing is, but it
things. And then now we have to get stuff back into the edit, the edit
Mhm.
room.
Well, that was all fairly straightforward. They would just send us media, MXF media and bins. They have their own internal editorial department who would ship that stuff over. And Shaw would build those into review timelines and cut them into the reels, and we'd track them in databases. And at that point, it becomes somewhat traditional for a motion capture film as far as finishing is concerned. And our team, because we work with an internal vendor, and Jim and all these renders realize these are files that we get delivered that we have to bring in. And I think at one point I was doing the math and figuring out how many renders internally our team, both in New Zealand and LA, were dealing with on a weekly basis. And it was something north of 3,600 files on a weekly basis. So that wasn't the whole time, but there was a fairly sustained period of time where we were bringing in literally thousands of files a week and keeping them organized, knowing what they were for, who was supposed to review them, where they're supposed to go. Are they supposed to go in front of Jim, or are they not ready for that yet? I mean, that was all part of what I mean by when I say that it really functioned as a facility internally, because we were a facility and we were also a picture editorial department.
You mentioned all these renders that came in and just kind of said, oh, they went in the timeline, and we made sure they were synced up. But like, what was the process of knowing which track, for example, a render went on to know this is the latest one, but it hasn't been approved? It's been approved by Rivkin, but it hasn't been approved by James. Now this one's approved by James, but we've got another one or whatever.
So
all in the timeline?
All in different timelines and different folders.
Different timelines.
Yeah. But
luckily, we kind of had a system. No, we kind of had a system which was great because Jim reviewed a lot of this stuff before they sent it to us. So we also knew that what we were getting sent was more or less Jim approved. But there were obviously portions.
That's on the Weta side.
Yeah, but there were times when we wanted to get this in front of an editor first to make sure that everything that was approved is also gone through them as well. So.
And then internally, Steve, we kept track of that in different areas of the Avid project and different types of timelines. We had a very specific ingest process that, a lot of the challenging things is we worked these processes out step by step so that people could follow them to the letter and they'd be replicated perfectly every time. And a lot of the ways we did that was through, similar to the way you guys have training videos on the Boris FX website. I would make video tutorials of myself or of one of the other members of the team going through the process and describing it step by step. And we'd post that on our server. And then if new people came on and they wanted to learn or get their hands on a new process, we'd say, okay, here's the video, use this material as a practice run. And it was also instructive because a lot of times, other departments wouldn't understand necessarily all the steps that went into us bringing in a file and tracking it properly, which the gist of the workflow is bring it in, copy in, paste relevant metadata, export out a database file, put that into FileMaker, and then cut the new render into the specific timeline and specific track that it's been called out to go into. And then at the very end of that, we had a very specific Slack channel in editorial where we would copy and paste and say, this submission, it was usually like a scene number underscore, a date number underscore, a letter has been cut in and it's in the following places.
Yeah.
So we did that over and over and over again.
Constantly. And Steve, to answer probably part of your question that you were asking about, like where things went from after reviews probably into the timeline, is that once the scene was like turned over, we would get all these updates, and once an editor reviewed that and Richie Bainham reviewed them, there would be these reviews would be with a lot of people, a lot of coordinators on the lab side, and they would be taking notes. And then after the review is over, they would send us the notes, and we would know more or less what is approved and what isn't approved, and we would take those and cut those into the reel as the latest version.
Yeah. And then they'd go into the film. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. And so that gets us. Is that scene one done, or do we have more process going from
Well, yeah.
once it
Then
gets cut into the scene?
Jim would review with Weta on their proprietary systems, like Shaw said, and so once we got renders back from Weta, we knew pretty much Jim had signed off on them, and they'd go in the film. And then at that point, it's just an iteration process. If they're making creative changes or technical approvals, you're receiving a new version that Jim's already blessed, and your scene, looks finished rendered. I mean, one part of this process we haven't even covered yet, we skipped right over, which is the stereography of the whole thing.
Oh my
And
gosh.
on movie one, they invented this process called wheels, and it's named after the device that the stereographers use to adjust the interocular values and the convergence values and everything of the stereo itself. But once a scene had been turned over, there was a parallel process that went on when it went into our internal lab, where Jim's team of Jeff Burdick and Robbie Perigo and our lab side team and Nate and Sam would go through shot by shot and call out stereo values based on camera, and then also do any sort of smoothing to the camera that Jim wanted, because a virtual camera is data, and anytime anybody's used a visual effects program, there can be errant keyframes in a dope sheet that you have to sort of edit out because there's a bump that you didn't intend to be there, something like that. So then the process would go through stereography and camera smoothing. Those would come back. And then and that's all going on while the sequence artist teams are receiving all of Jim's turnover notes and trying to execute those in advance of going to Weta. And we had...
And you skipped over 23 and 48 as well. That was another process.
I was going to say Dave Emmerich's
48
Dave
FPS,
Emmerich's,
yeah.
so.
Yeah, we had a
rates.
world-class camera operator on staff that would help consult on and execute the camera smoothing and the reoperating if anything was needed that would go on in the virtual space. And luckily, even though I worked very closely with Avid to make 48 frame stereo playback in HD a thing that the program could do, luckily we never really worked at 48 frames per second. We would have 48 frame projects so that we could flip to 48 and make sure certain things were working, certain things were not, find that out. But all of our live action dailies were shot at 48 FPS and were kept in the timeline in Avid at 48 FPS. And then Avid applies, the T effect to do the math for you. And that all actually worked really off the bat. We didn't have a ton of complications in regards to that. But those shots would get called out. They were shot all 48 so that at any point in time, if a shot or an element needed to turn into 48, it was all there. And then throughout the visual effects process, Jim would call out a shot as, I think this should be 48. I think this should be 48. Let's keep that 24. And eventually something like what, Ben, like 85%. What do you guys think? 85% of the film ended up being 48 frames per second?
Yeah, roughly.
So, yeah. So that was a consideration, and we certainly had to do a lot of workflow design around it to make sure that like the A and B frame that we're displaying in 24 is accurate to what the A and B frame is when Weta's actually making it at 48 frames per second. But other than that, it wasn't necessarily something we had to interact with all the time throughout all these years.
And you were not, the editors were not watching in stereo, correct?
No, we watched in 2D. We worked in 2D and we watched in 2D because like we've gotten all the way to the end, right? And that's where the stereography is happening and the virtual state. So we wouldn't have even been able to watch everything in 3D until somewhat late into 2022 anyway. So
Yeah.
it just never made sense to do so.
Yeah,
Hey,
but Jeff Burdick, and all the team there, they were keeping up with the stereo more or less,
Yeah,
since the
and-
end of 2018
And
onward.
Wendy and
The only
Kristen
thing,
and everybody.
yeah, Kristen was really keeping track of our stereo towards the end. We would not have delivered this movie with the state of the 3D without her and definitely Jeff and Robbie. But the thing we were checking though is to make sure that the live action 3D plates were correct stereo. So the team who were bringing in those plates in New Zealand, Gretchen, Liz, Molly Morgan, and Jess, they were all taking a look at that as it was being shot.
Yeah, sometimes you'd get our dailies back. That was one thing we didn't really talk about.
Yeah, we didn't really dive
ordering-
into live action as
Yeah, ordering plates from Park Road.
Hey, but before we
yeah.
talk about live action, I think that there's probably some fans of all of you
Yeah, let's
guys
get
out
some
there
questions.
that want some questions answered from either the internal team at Boris or some of the people watching on the inner tubes. Ben?
Let's do it.
I'm gonna grab just a couple.
Okay.
I think one of these actually might tie into what you were going to talk about anyway, which was about like how temp comps start to work. I mean, we sort of approached this a little bit, but
So
what?
this is
Yeah,
very
just
interesting.
talk about this.
So at the beginning, there was always a plan to have a post-viz team created and installed in our pipeline. At the beginning of live action, that was not in place yet. And actually, for a period of about a year, we had a Boris FX on all of our systems. And if Jim called out that he needed to see this scene comped, we would order these pre-keyed CG assets that we'd bring into the timeline, and then we'd use a combination of Primat and Mocha to integrate our live action into those plates. And that was mostly done in the stuff on the sinking Sea Dragon towards the end with the spider, escaping from the clutches of the RDA and the final gun battles and all that stuff. That's what we were working on primarily in there. And I know that Sean Abrahamian and Jamal and I did quite a lot of temp comping at that time to make sure that David, who was working on those sections, could see how these plates were all going to work together. We also had this incredible gentleman down in New Zealand named Casey Schatz, who is, I mean, if there is a smarter person on earth, I don't know that I've heard of them before. And I think that what he could do with After Effects, and he was our sort of simulcam guru. He worked on Game of Thrones previously and Avatar 1, integrating the dragon and big CG battles and stuff on set on Game of Thrones. And for us, sometimes he would go in and take the depth data and bring it into After Effects and do these Casey comps that were sort of quickly showing Jim that his material he's shooting is going to work. Because, that's the most stressful thing when you're on a production set is you're like, I'm shooting these plates. I have no idea if they're going to work. But Casey would take those and we would receive them too. And we brought them in and into the Avid when Casey was done, because Jim reviews everything at his Avid. That's his primary lifeline at all times.
Casey was instrumental with those comps on the underwater scenes, because some of the times the simulcam wouldn't work underwater. So Casey, as we were shooting the water scenes with, like, say, Jack, spoiler alert, at the end of the movie where he's pulling Courage out, there wouldn't be simulcam for that because the camera would be being shot underwater by our underwater DP, Pete Zuccarini. And Casey was just there. As soon as called cut, he would bring it in and start doing rough comps on that.
And so then our post-viz, after our post-viz pipeline got set up, what would happen is they'd receive high enough res EXRs from our lab, and using our internal pipeline, they would comp and deliver after a scene had been vetted for turnover, polished live action comps that would live on and be our screening materials until we would get the shots back from Weta.
And I think that sort of then leads me very, very neatly into the other question that people have been asking again and again and again. But these files aren't small, and we touched on a little bit of like how much storage space you were using. But is there an estimate of
on the lab side? I don't know.
How many of these things were you using?
I had about 700,000. No, on the lab side, I don't know what the final number turned out to be. I know it was petabytes, but because we had all these assets, it was a facility size server. On the Avid side, we had 320 terabyte Nexus. We had 4 320 terabyte Nexuses that were kept in sync by the wizardry of the head of our, the CTO of Lightstorm and the head of our systems department, Tim Bissio. And he concocted this magic sorcery that would, I'm doing the same thing now on the project I'm working on using like 5 different programs, and it's slow. Tim's was proprietary and it was lightning fast. I mean, if we brought media in LA, within 20 minutes it was down in New Zealand, and we were working pretty much in sync at all times across multiple sites. And that was, I think at one point Ryan came up to me, Ryan Champney, and said, "Hey, I calculated if you pressed play on all the media," and this is with apologies to Top Gun, where I know they shot a lot of footage, but Ryan said, if you press play and it let all the video we've recorded for this project run from beginning to end, it would take something over 2 years to finish. And that wasn't even at the end of the project. That was in like 2019 or 2020 that he told me that. So we had, thousands and thousands of hours of footage. And again, it's not all footage like you would think of, from a set, but between reference cameras and test shoots and virtual cameras and live action cameras and all fax footage, which we didn't even get into, to help train Weta's facial system, that all piped through the Avid as well. And we had an unfathomable amount of material that we were, and I have to say, our project on Avid was humongous, and we did not have very many problems that were related to the size of the project. I mean, I'm talking over 200 gigabytes for an editing project, and we did not see performance hits. So it was really very robust, and I have to tip my hat to the advancements, because I remember not long ago where if you had over 500,000 files on a Unity, you would crash and burn and lose your whole show. So I think it was definitely a Herculean task to keep track of, and a ton of effort, a ton of footage to keep in high res and also in an offline resolution for our Avid. But it was actually all fairly smooth. We didn't really have any downtime related to any significant downtime related to media management. Actually, I'll say one caveat to that. When we moved into lockdown, we switched from Mac-based Avids to Windows-based Avids because we were going with a HPRGS solution. And one of the problems at the time, which Avid has subsequently addressed, was that you had to mount every workspace to a letter of the alphabet drive on a Windows computer, and we had more than there are letters in the alphabet. So one of the initial things that I had to do to get us able to get back up and running during COVID lockdown was compress probably 50 plus workspaces into as few as I possibly could. And I think I got it down to under 20, and that if you mounted under 20, you could have the whole show. except not Avatar 1, but realized the whole Avid project, all the media from Avatar 1 was available to us at all times and at any time. You just couldn't mount those two things together. That was the only significant downtime, and that was just a Windows Media Composer limitation. So, because you couldn't use UNC or something yet, I think I remember that being the case. But yeah, the real
Sounds like
challenge
time
with
to,
all that footage
vent
was
new letters.
keeping it organized and using locators to keep notes and being able to quickly understand and identify what it is that you were looking at. And that was something that the assistant team who were on the stages did an amazing job keeping up with. This load is this camera with this character changed, or these fax performances, or whatever the case may be. We had it designed where it was fairly easy to pinpoint something. If somebody said, around this date, I know we shot something like this with this person in it, and we could go find it in our Avid project within a number of minutes. So it was a fairly well organized and structured effort with all that material.
But that search all had to go through a separate file database, I assume. It wasn't just a...
We did have a really good FileMaker database. We had a guy named Matt Brooks who helped us, and I did a bit of constructing on it as well, to be able to input. There's no code book on this film. It's not like a traditional film where you output all the dailies and bring it into a code book. But there was also a few of our assistants were adventurous enough, and I sort of spearheaded this, of learning the Linux tools that the lab side people used, because they had much better tools to query our database of media. And so a few times we would go onto the Linux side, and if the ADs had said, hey, March 2017, I know we shot something where this guy was rolling around the volume on a chair and we got to use that here in this spot, you could go onto the Linux side and search by date. And there were some HTML-based tools as well that were developed that could help with this sort of thing. But then you could say, is this what you're talking about? And then find it pretty quickly. And then once you understood what they were asking for, we could find it in the Avid based on date or based on scene. So
there were a lot of motion pickups throughout the process. So if an AD or somebody had a recollection that they had already captured maybe that motion or that scene, then we could be the quick visual confirmation of that, which was again, over a 5-year period, you're tracking a lot of things within that Avid. So it became it widens the purpose of the tool, right? The Avid, you think is just for editing, but it was everything.
Yeah, we had to try and figure out how to use it for way more than that. And there were a lot of things, that Avid was really psyched to get feedback on, because they just don't have a testing environment as big as that and putting as much stress on it as we did. So it was good. It was good, and it led to a lot of improvements for them as well, being involved with us.
Excellent. Well, I'm going to hand back over to Steve, I think, for the last bit. I just want to say, if you do have questions in chat, please keep them coming. We will get to as many as we possibly can. I'm doing my best, chat. I'm doing my best. All right, Steve, back to you. Thank you.
Sure. Well, I think the next thing to do, if we've got the time, and it would have to be quick because we're already at 2 hours, I think, in 15 minutes. Are we really that long into this? Anyhow,
goodness, we are.
So we covered getting a scene that is all Navi generated characters, but what about the live action thing? We talked a little bit about the pre-comps that were necessary,
Right.
but what's going on with a live action character scene?
So there were a few things that we needed to, as we said earlier, the virtual, they captured almost everything, even if it was eventually going to be live action, so that they had a version of it all virtual to use to design. And you know, so it was actually kind of funny because Jack Champion, who plays Spider, when he first started working with us, was about 12 years old, and you know, was short and had a squeaky little voice. And so we have, you know, all these hours of capture and all these versions of scenes with what we called Baby Spider, and he then very quickly sprouted into a very tall, well-built man with a deep voice. And it was very interesting because from one scene to another, you would have maybe live action footage of Jack cut against capture of Jack, where his voice would go about 3 octaves difference, depending on what what you were talking about. But we had these full cut scenes that Jim had done at least a preliminary pass on with his cameras, and we had to then take those scenes based on the shoot schedule. And the team in New Zealand was instrumental in this process. Create a bunch of new camera loads, audio files, and reference materials that would go out on set. And then we also had to make sure that there were avids on set. And some of the sets were not in our facility structure, so they had to have we had to have complete Nexus duplicates on those big G-RAID Shuttle XL drives that were Thunderbolt hooked into an Avid cart that we had built and custom designed that could get wheeled around to different locations so that Jim could refer to things as he's shooting it. And Ben, if you want to take over talking about that sort of process, you were the man on the spot for that sort of stuff for a lot of it, you and Gretchen down there.
Yeah, I was one of the few members of the New Zealand team down there, really spearheaded by Gretchen Schroeder, and then we had Liz Denenkamp, Molly McKinnon, Morgan Williams, and Jess O'Donoghue. They were all on the front lines of the New Zealand live action shoot down there. Just want to make sure that that they get the proper shout out, because they were instrumental for how we made it through production with our live action shoot. And it was crazy because we would Jim would be shooting stuff there, and when we get the simulcam footage back, was we were talking about earlier, and it's got the live action actor and then it's the CG character there, and then we're getting a stream of that back that's in sync with the plate, so we're able to build those as dailies. And then eventually, it took a while for this process to actually happen, but we would get reference live comp renders back of the simulcam shots that had the reference stacks of the CG characters there. So we were actually able to identify the performance takes of all of those simulcam live action characters, of the CG characters within those live action simulcam takes.
And the first time the first round of shooting we went down, we realized that initially the audio was playing back out of the eyeline camera, the eyeline iPad itself, or speakers throughout the set. And what that was doing was causing an offset of a variable of frames between the audio that the actor is responding to and the audio as it actually should be in the cut. So when it came back, we had to devise a whole process to resync those two things up and rectify the timecode variable. And then that was a whole hullabaloo that took a little bit of development and a reorganization of strategy. And then the second round, they sourced the audio out of a different place, and it was far more friendly to the weta turnover process. But we would basically, on the spot, we were getting feeds, video taps out of the Venice cameras that were being recorded by the Aja Keypro ProRes recorders, then fed back to us labeled with timecode. These were 24 frame plates, but they'd be in sync with, as Ben said, the simulcam stream that was also recorded out of the virtual camera video tap. So we would use those to edit until we knew sort of what takes Jim was interested in. And then because the 48 frame dailies had to be stereo corrected before they came in at full frame rate and full res. We would order a subset, sort of like figuring out what takes you wanted to print back in the film days. We would order a subset of those from Park Road Post, which were the actual source camera 48 frame stereo corrected plates that we would send over to Weta.
And while this, to go back to the live action shoot, while that's going on, I know we talked about the virtual camera cuts that were pre-cut or cut before we went to go live action, but Jim could go off and shoot any angle he wanted. It didn't have to be that specific shot. He was like, I want this shot to be live action. He would want to be able to shoot the whole scene, and he would have free reign. And so that's why we did those simulcamera turnovers.
And then you have to rectify sort of the difference after he's done. But you know, it was an interesting challenge because I'm sure you can imagine, you know, you have Spider being grabbed by a character who is in virtual space. It's a CG character, and we had our amazing performance capture troupe was down there in blue suits, you know, emulating perfectly what the virtual character is supposed to be doing to Jack's arm, so that, you know, if he's grabbing him and shaking him, it moves somewhat in concert with what the CG person is doing. I mean, some of the most physically talented people I've ever been around, to be able to just like watch something and go, okay, that's the cadence, and then just go do it. And it was something. It was incredibly remarkable to work with those guys, and then once that would all happen, we would have to, as we said, rectify the differences in timing, fix contact points, redo our motion vetting process, sync bodies and faces, and then hand it back over to Justin and his team. And they would either have to turn the scene over if it hadn't been turned over already, or revise the scene turnover that now has live action elements in place into the cut.
Yeah. Is that a good place to switch to Shaw?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, he basically, explained the next process, which is, again, we get back to vetting. If there's new motion, if there's new, if something changed within that because of the plate, the new live action plate was shot, maybe something changed in the virtual motion. So a lot of things, what I would do is I would re-import the XML, and then I'd have this tool where I could compare time code on a per shot, or excuse me, on a per element basis to see if anything's been adjusted, and then just basically tell Weta what's been changing. Because a lot of times what it is, it's an investigation of what you're getting and why you're getting it. So sometimes it could be a costume update, sometimes it could be an environment update, sometimes it could be a facial performance update. Sometimes it can be a whole host of things. And I just want to make sure that they're understanding what they're getting, so they don't have to go back on work that can be salvageable, because again, the shot's constantly being updated throughout the process, where again, it's like, here's the new live action plate. We had to do maybe some contact adjustments here and there, and just give them as much information as possible so that they know, what they can retain and what has to be changed. I think one of the most challenging scenes I remember in this whole process, especially with the contact, was when Spider, they were dragging Nateum in the death scene. Another spoiler alert, but when they were dragging him onto the rocks, that whole process of like the waves changing and then everybody trying to grab on the Nateum, because you had a live action character, and then again, it wasn't just a calm underwater shot. It was actual waves that were manipulating not only the CG characters but the live action characters.
That shot is mind blowing. I mean,
they had these huge bulldozers like punching into the water to create the waves on the soundstage. It was
and then Weta's CG water sims had to match the cadence of the live action waves, and the CG characters had to match the buoyancy of the waves that were shot live action. And all that integrates to go from a shot that goes from underwater to above water to onto a rock surface, combining a live action, it's not a digidouble, a live action character who's holding a virtual character alongside a number of other virtual characters coming out of a turbulent sea.
And the other thing,
I still look at that shot and I go, this is the most amazing thing that I've ever seen. And again, when you're watching it, if you're just into the story and you're not thinking about what it is that you're actually looking at, but to be able to pull that off is some kind of, I've had a few visual effects editor friends of mine text me and go, how in the world did that come together? So pretty amazing stuff.
And a lot of the
I hope so.
decisions were made. It was like, what can we save live action from this shot, because maybe we can't, do a full live action character in this scene because of, maybe there's a discrepancy in contacts and things of that nature. So that was always a fun thing to listen to, in the visual effects reviews was, what can we salvage in this shot in order to make it look as real as possible.
Yeah, and if anybody hasn't checked out Eric Saindon talk about some of that stuff on the Corridor Crew thing, I mean, it's a cool breakdown. They do a good job of asking some really interesting questions. But I think in that shot specifically, if I'm remembering correctly, they did use quite a lot of Jack, the live action Jack, when they're carrying Nateum onto the rock.
Mm-hmm.
But it was pretty amazing. We're saying all these things very nonchalantly about how we did that and how we did this. And I just want to underscore again that all of the steps required such an incredible amount of effort by our whole team in editorial and in LEI at the lab and at Weta, just to make sure that the end result was as perfect and seamless as it ended up being. And everybody worked so hard and did such an amazing job. And we're all we're just here to convey all that behind the scenes work and how proud we are of the effort and of everybody that we worked with, and how dedicated they were to this the whole time.
Yeah, and the other thing too, I mean, this is a little bit off what you're talking about, but again, it's so unconventional to, and I'm not saying we ever questioned the editors and like what they were handing to us, but we had to work in conjunction with them to make sure that what they were turning over, was exactly the performance, because a lot of times when we'd have to rebuild the reference or anything of that nature, we had to make sure that we would go, okay, we have to change this because this changed, the audio might have been slipped, and so you're sort of working in conjunction with the editors in a different manner. Whereas on a conventional movie, it's like, just turn this over. This is exactly what we want. It is what it is, versus there's a lot of investigation that even comes after you get a locked cut from an editor, which is it's an unusual process, and
it's so complex, and there's so many moving parts, and so everybody's a human being, and is capable of making mistakes, and so we really tried to engender a team environment where you pick each other up, and you if you see something, you help out, and you ask questions. Hey, I just want to make sure this is correct, because there's so much going on at all stages. As Shaw said, you're not questioning anybody. You're just, you're looking out for your buddy, because maybe something slipped through the cracks. Nobody's perfect, but you want to make sure before that goes out and, Weta starts spending money on it, that is what is intended. So
it's not even a mistake, so to speak. It's almost like your editors have to be creative, right? They have to be, they're not there for the technical part of it, for the most part. It's like you want them to be able to be creative, because that's what they're bringing to the to the movie, and emotion, bringing emotions to cuts. When things come to us, it's very like numbers and sync and things of that nature, which we just want to make sure that they're aware of anything that might be not lining up perfectly.
And communication in our team was quite easy, as you can imagine. The three of us here talking, it was like this with everybody, where it was very free and easy, and everybody was, happy to talk to one another for the most part, and on each other's side, and
no
working
egos.
working as a unit. Yeah, it's all about just caring about doing the good job and making sure everything's right. And we also, it may seem surprising, but we had a lot of fun throughout this process, especially amongst each other. And it was a really lively group of people to work with, and a really funny group of people to work with. I mean, I've never laughed so hard in my life in some of the conversations with this team, even on a Slack. It's funny,
And
and we just tried to keep it as light as possible, as much as we
Justin, I
could.
think that's a Yates. I think that's a testament to you and Gaudio for hiring the people who knew that they were going to be there, dedicated people, and also people who that were going to be enjoyable to work with.
Yeah,
Yeah, we
actually,
we
I want to point out right there for the people, because this is obviously we're doing this for the people who are listening in, and for those kind of people, that you guys are the epitome of what many of the people who are listening in, like, this is the job, their dream job, right? You guys got their dream job. And Ben was alluding to the fact that getting that job is not necessarily because of a technical skill, but because someone saw in you a work ethic, an ability, like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be with this guy 20 hours a day, this woman. I got to be able to have fun and enjoy my day. Talk to me about hiring those kind of people. And for the people listening in, that's probably more important than a lot of technical skills.
Well, what I can say is my friend Jason hired both Justin and I, and Justin and Jason worked together on the first Avatar. I was lucky enough to work with Jason as an apprentice on Battleship, and I had been curious about the Avatar process even at that point. So he and I had been talking for many, many years about me just picking his brain. Hey, if this goes, how are you going to build a team, and what are you going to want to do? And we had had lots of conversations about that, and we were both of the same mind, where we were willing to wait for the right people. And part of what that ended up meaning was not focusing so much on credits and what else that's impressive that somebody had worked on, but character references, people, knowing people who at least a primary source has interacted with or knew, and could vouch for, but then also a specific sort of energy and vibe in the interview. And I think, you can't be a sort of high octane personality to survive in an environment like this. You have to be sort of easygoing, but also quietly very intense and passionate about doing a good job. And so we were always looking beyond the credits on the resume. We wanted to make sure people understood a technical level, what Avid, but our workflow is so different. There wasn't an amount of experience that anybody could have outside of it that would have made them come in and know what to do right off the bat. So we knew there's a learning curve and it's long, and we're willing to put in the training and investment into people who are the right people to get them up to speed in our system. And luckily, we were able to be very intentional. And when Jason and I would interview people, we would take our time and not try and react, which sometimes put a little bit of temporary stress on the team, because maybe we waited a month and a half for somebody to take the trip that they wanted to take to back home for a couple of weeks, or to finish up on a job that they were finishing. And we didn't have that extra person immediately. But the reality was, even if we hired someone right away, they wouldn't have been very helpful right at the beginning anyway. So it was worth waiting for the right people, and making sure to not just look at, credits or what they've done in the past, but meet with them and talk with them and really get a sense for the type of person that you're bringing in. And then that turned out to be our most successful. And we considered people from all corners of experience. We have reality TV assistants who would come in, and this was their first job out of reality TV, and they did an amazing amount of job. I mean, I come from reality TV, so I sort of had a hunch, because in reality TV, you're dealing with, again, thousands of hours of footage in a very quick way, and you have to organize it and handle it. And that's not a traditional film workflow. You might get on a film, you might get 3 to 6 to 9 hours of dailies a day. It's all described out on paper, so you have something to fall back on. In this environment, they shot what they shot, and we didn't get camera reports. We didn't get, that wasn't. I mean, we did for live action, but for all the virtual stuff, our camera reports was internal reporting. That's why we had people out on stage all the time. So it was super, super crucial that the team was all working together, that they got on really well. And, not necessarily that like you're best friends with absolutely every person, but it's imperative that you can work and have a good time working with people who you're going to work with in very stressful environments, sometimes for years on end. So I really strongly believe in that as a hiring process, instead of a sort of more reactionary, I need somebody here tomorrow way, and then you just take whomever's available. We were very lucky to be able to do that. So
Ben Brownlee, we've gone quite long, and I'm sure there's
We
some more
have.
questions. So I'm going to kind of let you ask some questions and try to wrap things up with some questions from the audience and questions maybe even from
Yep.
the Boris internal team.
Well, I think, yeah, there are. Thanks for that, Steve. I mean, we do have a few more questions. I am also very conscious of the time as well. I know this has gone on, been a long one, but it's been absolutely fascinating, and that's the problem. Is
it's
that
fun, and it's such a treat to be able to talk about it. And I really want to thank Steve and John and everybody over there for allowing us to come out here and represent this, because it's a really unique work environment, and I think it's a real honor to be able to represent everybody and talk about some of the stuff that we did, because it's incredibly impressive to everybody outside, and I want everybody to have their time in the sun to be sort of acknowledged for all of that amazing work.
Well, absolutely, and it's also a very, I mean, it's a unique workflow as well. That's why it's been such a joy to talk about it for the last couple of hours, because like this is not a traditional workflow. I mean, this is something that you've underlined time and time again, and just I think it's taken me the last 150 minutes to actually start to get my head around what's been going on. So it's been amazing. But I mean, I do need to have like a couple of last questions here. I think, okay, well, one of the ones that I think again you alluded to earlier, which was working through lockdown has been a challenge for all productions, and working through lockdown on a production that is taking place around the globe probably adds in a few more wrinkles. What were the solutions that you found for those challenges?
So we were actually in a really good position at the beginning of, even before, because we had a remote cutting room set up that was already syncing in New Zealand. And we were already able to, in certain ways, remote in and see what everybody was doing down there. Once we decided, and I worked with our CTO, Tim Bisio, on a setup that we could scale amongst the size of the crew and have everybody work from home, which was HPRGS on a laptop with a couple of monitors and a keyboard and everything, and then a remoted computer that those would connect into, using a very secure VPN and lots of, I mean, the network engineer Mike Reed over there is an absolute savant when it comes to things like this, and he designed this thing that is probably one of the most secure things that I've ever been a part of, and he's just very casual about it too, which is kind of infuriating. But it was set up and tested and passed all these protocols, and we were able to remote onto what we called our Windows Avids, using RGS. And we were able to set up a few of those in New Zealand that the editors in LA could remote onto and interact with the material in real time that Jim was shooting down there. The challenges were shifting schedules and the time difference, especially in the daylight savings nonsense, when it's sort of like a day and 5 hours from where we are here in LA. We had to stagger people and work some weird hours and some weird schedules sometimes.
Hey,
But
can I interject real quick?
yeah,
Even prior, this was I had a conversation with Jim in January, and he basically foreshadowed and said the country's going to shut down. And I was like, what are you talking? He's very much a scientific savant in the sense of he kind of knows when things are getting a little more serious way before anybody else, because he's very well read. He's got certain people that he has contacts with that he just knew. And hats off to Jim and John. They actually had geared us up. Like within, I think we were only down for maybe 2 weeks.
It was like a week and I had some people up in a week and a half, but I had started working with Tim, testing things at my house by the end of, in the early days of February, for anticipating a work from home.
And Jim called it, and he just, he has this intuition about sort of.
But again, it had to be scaled to not just the 20 something editorial team members. We had a couple hundred lab artists that also needed to be able to work from home. So the solution that they came up with was scalable to the size of our designs. And eventually I think some of us transitioned over to using Jump Desktop to get back onto our Mac Avids and things like that. But we had, I always tout this number, but we ended up having something like 45 Avids between our Mac and Windows Avids between here and New Zealand, and the performance was really, really good. But the biggest challenges were not so much the remoting, connecting. I mean, we used Evercast a lot as well, and for all of our reviews, and Blue Jeans for conference calls, and Zoom for certain things. I mean, we used a lot of different tools for different reasons, but a lot of it was just being on the clock at the right times to be aware of, the stuff that you're needing to know is going on, so that you can work accordingly.
And a lot of people talk about
the spread of information between people.
Yeah, the Slack, to be honest with you, I always say it. I mean, I think without Slack, I don't think the movie gets done. I'm not saying never gets done, but Slack was really a huge tool for us because it kept us at our desks, but we could also be in a meeting at the same time and then answering questions as we were continuing to work. Whereas,
and you can reference your Avid too while you're talking to somebody.
Whereas we all know, like, meetings can be kind of a time suck where it's like you don't know if this is specific towards your need, but then you just, I'm not saying you wasted time, but you basically sat in a meeting that could have been, we always make the joke, it could have been email. We go through that process, but with Slack, it was amazing because you were instantaneously accessible. No one had to walk from like one section of the building town to you to look at something, where you could just basically get whatever you needed right away.
I mean, our team specifically had been on a Slack because we described already, we had multiple stages going at all times. So I needed to be able to interface with the assistants that I had out on the tank stage and the assistants that I had out on stage 26 and 7 and wherever else they were. I needed to be able to find out in real time what's going on in case there's some thing that Jim wants pulled up and the assistant who's out there doesn't, necessarily familiar with what he's asking for. Like, there was a lot of I'll be right there's, crisis management sort of things that were we were using Slack for that before lockdown. And so our team was very much like, Slack, but with everybody now. So So we were very ready for COVID lockdown, and probably in a better position than a lot of other shows that didn't have a syncing protocol in place, or didn't have a remoting protocol in place, and or a group chat sort of protocol in place. And we were already set up with a lot of that stuff in a preliminary sense before that all went down.
And
Yeah,
next question.
Next question. Well, actually, I mean, I think we're going to have to stop it there.
There we go. All right.
I just want to say thank you again to you guys, and thanks to everybody for letting us do this. And thank you again from the bottom of my heart to my whole team on Avatar. It was an absolute joy to work with all you guys. And I think I forgot to mention our PA, Kyle Valdez, who came on to Transformers with me recently, and is now off on his own journey to enter into becoming an assistant editor and everything too. But we had a great time with everybody, and it was a real joy to work on these projects. And I'm truly honored to have been able to talk about it with everybody. So thank you.
Thanks, Ben and Steve.
Thanks.
Too.
Thank you.
Yeah, guys, thank you so much for your time. And we really appreciate a really deep dive into this completely unique production. And thank you so much for giving so much of your time to discussing it, and so worthwhile. I really appreciate you guys spending so much time with us.
Hey, no problem. If you ever have to fill, a 3-hour space somewhere, just give us a call, and we'll just vamp, for a while.
We weren't even close to being done at 3 hours. Like, this could easily be 6, but we just need to do it someplace where we have food and a bathroom closer by.
You just give us a call, and we'll go out to lunch for an entire day.
You got it. It was great talking.
Thanks, everybody.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you. Well, we'll hang out a second because you got to be part of the final giveaway as well. So let's give away some more stuff. We've already had a couple of winners today. We've had Lee, who walked away with a Wacom Intuos Pro. So thank you very much to our friends at Wacom. I should be saying, for helping us out with that. Of course, if you want to get your hands on your own Intuos Pro and you live in the US, now has never been a better time, or there has never been a better time than now to do it, because they are now $80 off for a very limited time. So going from, I'm trying to find from $379.95 to $299.95 for the Intuos Pro. I love it. I've got it here. I'm throwing all the other stuff on my desk around just to try and show it to you. But no, definitely recommend the Intuos Wacom Pro Medium. Yeah, so Lee won that from us. Rebecca walked away with a 1-year subscription of the Silhouette product. And we have one more winner who's going to win Boris FX Suite. That's everything that we make, including all of the software that has been referenced over the last couple of hours. The Boris FX software has been referenced over the last couple of hours. Continuum Mocha Pro, but also Silhouette, Sapphire, and Optics. And that is going away to one lucky winner right now. So let's roll the drums, spin the tombola. Let's see who is going to be our third and final winner. It's going to be Esther Sokolov. Esther, congratulations. You have won the Boris FX Suite. Yay, everyone. There we go. I can just see everyone in my eye over there just jumping up and down in joy, screaming. Is that right? Oh, well done. Well done. The tombola has worked out for her very well. That's cool. That's actually very cool. Well, that's a really nice note to say goodbye to our guests. We have Justin Yates, Ben Murphy, Justin Shaw, Steve Hullfish, of course. Hang around in the green room if you would like after the show and crack open some non-alcoholic champagne. I just want to say, if you want to hear more of Steve's work, and I would highly recommend it, you want to go and visit the Art of the Cut. It's a weekly podcast or a weekly interview series that Steve does. aotc.borisfx.com, or head over to the blog and you can get little digested things for it as well. But AOTC, artofthecut.borisfx.com. Alrighty.
Amazing insight from some amazing people to get some technique and perspective. It's just it's one of my favorite things to listen to at any point. So
Really is. Yeah, get it on Apple Podcasts or where all good podcasts are found. Yeah, you can find a link in AOTC to borisfx.com as well. So join us there. Yeah, thank you very much for hanging out with Boris FX Live. It's been a pleasure to talk and for you to hang here as well. We do have more Boris FX Live coming up very soon. Obviously, check out the schedule at borisfxlive.com. And if you didn't win today, apart from the gift of knowledge, you still have the chance of winning at the next one. Just borisfxlive.com for all of your live goodness things. All right, my name is Ben Brownlee for Boris Effect. I want to say thank you once again to everyone for watching, and I will see you again soon. Bye for now.